Hello, everybody. Good morning, and happy belated Mother's Day to all the mothers out there, and single fathers, and mothers for fur babies, scaly babies, feathered babies, for all the moms. Happy belated Mother's Day. So, for today's story, we are gonna have a just so beginning. This particular whale bit off more than he can chew. Isn't that whimsical? Or at least it strikes me as full of whimsy and fun. So, we are actually going to be doing a series on the Just So stories by Rudyard Kipling. If that name sounds familiar, which I hope sounds familiar to you guys, that would be because we actually did one of his earlier stories, Ricky Tikki Tavi. And if you haven't listened to that yet, go back, listen to it. We discuss a little bit of Rudyard Kipling's history and inspiration behind the story, and we learned a lot about the main character. And so, in this particular tale that we're going to be doing, this particular bit of whimsy, and with the way the world is today, I just feel like there needs to be more whimsy, more fun, more abilities to help people to relax. Because I don't know about all of you, but I know that I am so stressed out that there are days where I just start crying. And I know that not everybody out there is recovering from brain surgery. I know that not everybody out there is struggling to find work because they were laid off. But there's enough of us out there where there are all of these layoffs happening. Where in the area where I live, the main hospital is talking about no longer taking a major insurance plan that is very big in our area. And it will create problems for thousands of patients in finding care. And because I know there are a lot of us out there for stress, I decided that we needed some whimsy. So if you're not in the mood for whimsy, head over to Moby Dick. He's not as whimsical. I mean, there's still some whimsy there, don't get me wrong, but he's not as whimsical over with Melville. And so for today's story, we are doing How the Whale Got His Throat. Isn't that fitting since we're talking about Moby Dick all the time? For our first Just So story to be How the Whale Got His Throat. So it's actually the very first of the Just So stories. Now, why do I keep saying Just So stories? This is literally what they are called. Rudyard Kipling called this series of short works, this book filled with short stories, Just So stories. And it's very important to note that he did that because when he was first coming up with these stories, he would actually tell them to his children. His children, it mattered to him what they thought. In fact, his daughter would correct his phrasing when he would go to tell the stories if he didn't tell it the exact same every time. So his daughter Josephine would do this over and over with him because the stories had to be just so. And in the case of How the Whale Got His Throat, there's a lot of references of "Oh my beloved" in there. And the reason why is because she loved it. And so every word, every phrase was painstakingly chosen. I feel that these are great tales for anybody out there who's needing help to get the dishes going. You just don't have the motivation. Take a listen to this, we'll get you through. Or my personal demon that I must slay, the laundry. I hate folding it, guys, and putting it away. Help me. If you got tips on how to keep me motivated there, let me know. But I know that for me, this is going to be something that's going to help me get through getting those everyday tasks done. And so we are going to, again, examine Rudyard Kipling. This man is from the 1800s. It's a completely different time. And when he was growing up, he actually didn't, he had such a happy childhood when he was in India. And then he came to England for school. And he didn't have a great experience. In fact, his experience actually, he uses his experience in some of his other books and in some of his other stories, which we will be talking about. But Just So stories, while you can hear his voice for the inspiration for him growing up in here, his big thing is he was such a devoted father. His children were so important to him. He wanted to be able to tell them stories about nature's phenomena, how the world is the way that it is. And he made it so filled with imagination and whimsy because he didn't want to crush his children. He wanted them to be able to, that innocence of a child where they have this just wonder of the world around them. He wanted to give them even more, he wanted to build on that wonder. when he made his Just So stories. And even when you think about how he was with Ricky Tikki, he puts in this whimsy, this sense of wonder and imagination that it makes you feel like you yourself, even as an adult, that you're growing and you can just feel that joy that children innately feel. You get a brief glimpse of that as an adult. And so when he goes and he does these stories, he's doing it so it helps children's imaginations. And so when I hear Just So stories, I think of them as being similar to myths and legends, because every culture has myths and legends. There are some cultures where the world is on a turtle's back and it's swimming through this vast ocean. Or how the moon came to be. A fox was involved. If you know the story, let me know. And yes, I may read that story later. We'll see. Having these stories of whimsy is so important. And something that I thought was really cool about Kipling is in his original editions of the book, he actually drew the pictures. They were in black and white and they had these fun captions for the readers to enjoy. It really just helped to build that story for the children. Now, where our first Just So story is how the whale got his throat. I thought it was only fitting that we talked about the whale just a little bit. Now, we're not going to go super in depth on whale parts and all of the different uses because we're already doing it in Moby Dick. I didn't think you needed it a million times over. If you disagree with me, let me know and I will be a little bit more repetitive. But until I hear from ya, we're not going to go too in depth. I've been doing a lot of whale documentaries and I thought that it would be fun to talk about whales a little bit because in this particular story, this whale is so hungry. He has eaten everyone in the ocean and he intends to continue to eat everyone on the surface as well. He's just he's starving Marvin. He's just so hungry. And so because I'm already doing research on whales, I was like, you know what? Let's talk about it. So when they talk about how the whale got his throat, they are describing the natural phenomena of a whale's baleen. And yes, it is pronounced baleen. I made sure to double check my pronunciation because I'd heard it pronounced a few different ways, like baleen, Balin, but it is baleen. I double checked the pronunciation because I had a couple different teachers when I was in 4th grade. And we're not going off of 4th grade Lacey knowledge, guys. I literally was looking at things and going off of documentaries. So, a whale's baleen is made out of keratin. Now, keratin should sound familiar to you. Why? Because that's what our nails are made out of and our hair. How cool is that? That whales have something similar to our hair and nails. Okay, maybe I'm the only one who thinks that's cool, but not the point. So this baleen, what it does is it works as a sifter. So the whale is going through and as most of you probably already know, what they eat is actually, like small krill, small fish, small shrimps, that krill in the ocean. And so they actually sift through. They take in the water and then they flush it out. There are some whales where they do it in the depths of the ocean. There are others where they skim the surface of the ocean, which is really cool. But again, we don't need to go too deep into all that. But what I thought would be really interesting to talk about is the purpose of baleen in whales. People, when they would hunt the whales, they would use that baleen for many different purposes. And I thought that it was really cool to discuss these. Like Europeans, when they talk about whalebone corsets, it's not real whalebone. Yeah, sorry to burst any bubbles out there. When you're like, oh, they're using the rib bones of whales. They're not using the rib bones of whales. They're actually using that baleen in the whale to create the ribbing in the corset so that it allows it to have some movement. And in fact, in corset making in today's world, they'll actually do what they call synthetic whalebone so they can get a similar appearance and movement so that it's not, yes, a lot of people are doing a lot of waist training and so they're to get that exaggerated hourglass figure. But a lot of corsets do what they used to do, which was, to help hold you in, yes, to create that hourglass figure, but it was more of a support, which is what corsets are supposed to be for. Again, sorry to break any misconceptions there, but another thing that was really cool is when you go and you look at the Alaska Native peoples, they used to use the baleen to make buckets, cups, and other containers. They used it throughout their everyday lives. They would make like ice scoops, sled runners, fishing line, lashings, and nets. So what they would do is they would take that whole part of the whale. They wouldn't just eat what was okay, like what was edible, and then just throw away the carcass. They used every part of it. And I focus on the baleen here because, well, it's very critical to our story of the whale's throat. But it also is a piece of the whale that I personally wouldn't have thought would have had as many uses and purposes as it did. From corsets to cups to lashings for sleds. I mean, I never would have thought of that. Well, I don't live the life, but, it's just not something that you would think about. And then when I was watching all of these different documentaries about whales, one of my favorites was Patrick and the Whale. It's important to talk about this particular one because science today, they're trying to understand whales' languages and how they are and, like how they interact because whales have this bond and this is across all whale species. It's not just singular whale species. I mean, yeah, there are some that are more social than others. But in the case of Patrick in the whale, he's doing studies on blue whales, he's doing studies on sperm whales, orca, and he talks about how the sperm whales are what he considers when people go and they're like, oh, the whale, that's the first one that comes into his mind because they are so social. Like, he discusses a whale's life cycle, which may not sound very fascinating, but if you go and you look at, like, young male sperm whales, they, once they are weaned, they move off and they actually form their own male-only pods for so many years. And they're so bonded. They are such close-knit friends until they're about the age of 30, when they suddenly branch off to live solitary lives. Like, why up until the age of 30 do you suddenly decide to branch off? The world doesn't actually know. But, it's one of those things where it makes studying them so worthwhile. And it's important, I mean, back to the males, like, they don't really have social interaction until it's mating season. But there was an incident when he was younger where there were whales that got stranded on the Yorkshire coast. There were 4, he called them teenagers because maybe they really were in their teens, but just based off of their sizes and the life cycle, that they're young juvenile males and they stranded and died. And he discussed how it's really common in the case of sperm whales for you don't ever just find just one beached whale. It's always in groups. They're so closely bonded that it's an all or nothing for them as a family. And why is that? We still don't technically know. But it's still something that's a really cool thing to explore. And so he talks about how scientists are trying to use technology to discover, how whales interact, how they socialize that bond. Whereas he goes and he actually swims with them, which is terrifying, by the way. It would be such a cool experience, but it would be so scary. But he's out there swimming with the whales and trying to get cameras and tags put on them so that he can try and track what they do, how they live their lives, so that we can have a better understanding, so we can help prevent these horrible catastrophes from happening. Because every single time they die, their population, yes, it's better than it's been in years, but it's still not big enough. They're still struggling. He just explores how they have these bonds and they work together. And one thing that really stuck with me from his experience, because we're going to discuss him much more in depth and a lot more in the Moby Dick episodes. Now, before I take this into a rambling that goes on forever, I did want to round this up with a quote from this particular documentary. So, Patrick Dykstra in Patrick and the Whale, he says something along the lines of, if humanity treated each other like sperm whales, it would be a much better world. And when you think about it, sperm whales, they take care of each other. They're a family. They're bonded. Even when different pods, different family units meet up, they're respectful. They work together. Like, when there's children and the mother needs to go eat, she has someone to watch over the baby so that she knows that her baby is safe. That is her most precious thing in the world, is that calf. And before she goes down, she's able to trust someone with her greatest treasure before going down to eat. And I don't know about you guys, but I can count on one hand and still have many fingers left over the amount of people that I would trust with my son. And that includes my husband, guys. Like, it includes my husband. I know that I couldn't trust most people with my son. And what would the world be if we did treat each other like these whales did, with the respect and the love, with those bonds? I think the world would probably be a much better place. I think we all need that. And I think that that's an important thing for everybody to experience, is knowing that they have that kind of support. I talked about earlier the stress of what's going on. I mean, maybe in your area, you're not going through, there's not all these mass layoffs occurring. Maybe there's not issues with health insurance. Maybe there's not a major problem with the economy. But I know that for my area and most of my friends, and I don't have a lot of friends, but none of them live where I live. They are scattered. There's some, in different countries. There's some who are on the other side of the country because I'm in the United States. I have very few on the West Coast, and I know that everybody has this crazy stress going on, whether it's the job is they're not paying more, but they're demanding far more from you and you're beyond your limits. Or there's these layoffs and they are insane. There are thousands of people going without work because all these layoffs are occurring. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, check the news or talk to your friends. I'm sure that it is, because I live under a rock. I'll be the first to admit it. I live under a rock. But when you're under that much stress, just trying to keep your job, trying to keep your head above water, it's hard to see that in the greater picture around you that everybody's struggling. And rather than be like, oh, I'm going to screw this person over so I can get ahead, what if we helped each other? What if we worked together? What if we chose kindness over being a shithead? I'm sorry, but there's so many people out there. If you do the right thing and you work together and you help each other out, you're stronger together. You improve as a team. And I still genuinely believe that. Like, I do. I'm, as my husband likes to say, I probably should have been born in a different time. But as I like to tell him, if I did live during this time frame where he thinks that I would have been happier, I I still wouldn't have been happy. But that's just because I want better for everybody. And I hope that this story is as fun for you as it was for me. Before our book reading begins, I just wanted to take a minute to say this book is a snapshot of the past. This book may contain negative views and or treatment of people and cultures. This was wrong then, and it is wrong now. Instead of blacklisting these novels, let's recognize the influence and learn from it. For as the philosopher George Santayana said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Let's learn from the past to create a more inclusive future together. How the Whale Got His Throat. In the sea, once upon a time, oh my best beloved, there was a whale, and he ate fishes. He ate the starfish and the garfish, and the crab and the dab, and the plaice, and the dace, and the skate and his mate, and the mackerel, and the pickerel, and the really, truly, twirly, whirly eel. All the fishes he could find in the sea he ate with his mouth, so till at last there was only one small fish left in all the sea, and he was a small 'stute fish, and he swam a little behind the whale's ear so as to be out of harm's way. Then the whale stood up on his tail and said, I'm hungry. And the small 'stute fish said in a small 'stute voice, Noble and generous cetacean, have you ever tasted man? No, said the whale. What is it like? Nice, said the small 'stute fish. Nice, but nubbly. Then fetch me some, said the whale, and he made the sea froth up with his tail. One at a time is enough, said the 'stute fish. If you swim to latitude 50 north, longitude 40 west, that is magic. You will find, sitting on a raft in the middle of the sea, with nothing on but a pair of blue canvas breeches, a pair of suspenders. You must not forget the suspenders, best beloved, and a jackknife. One shipwrecked mariner, who it is only fair to tell you, is a man of infinite resource and sagacity. So the whale swam, and swam, to latitude 50 north, longitude 40 west, as fast as he could swim, and on a raft in the middle of the sea with nothing to wear except a pair of blue canvas breeches, a pair of suspenders, you must particularly remember the suspenders, best beloved, and a jackknife, he found one single solitary shipwrecked mariner, trailing his toes in the water. He had his mummy's leave to paddle, or else he would never have done it, because he was a man of infinite resource and sagacity. Then the whale opened his mouth back and back and back, till it nearly touched his tail, and he swallowed the shipwrecked mariner, and the raft he was sitting on, and his blue canvas breeches, and the suspenders, which you must not forget, and the jackknife. He swallowed them all down into his warm, dark, inside cupboards, and then he smacked his lips, so, and turned round 3 times on his tail. But as soon as the mariner, who was a man of infinite resource and sagacity, found himself truly inside the whale's warm, dark, inside cupboards, he stumped, and he jumped, and he thumped, and he bumped, and he pranced, and he danced, and he banged, and he clanged, and he hit, and he bit, and he leaped, and he creeped, and he prowled, and he howled, and he hopped, and he dropped, and he cried, and he sighed, and he crawled, and he bawled, and he stepped, and he leapt, and he danced hornpipes where he shouldn't, and the whale felt most unhappy indeed. Have you forgotten the suspenders? So he said to the Stute-fish, "This man is very nubbly, and besides he is making me hiccough. What shall I do?" "Tell him to come out," said the Stute-fish. So the whale called down his own throat to the shipwrecked mariner, "Come out and behave yourself, I've got the hiccoughs." "Nay, nay," said the mariner, "not so, but far otherwise. Take me to my natal shore and the white cliffs of Albion, and I'll think about it," and he began to dance more than ever. "You had better take him home," said the Stute-fish to the whale. "I ought to have warned you that he is a man of infinite resource and sagacity." So the whale swam and swam and swam, with both flippers in his tail, as hard as he could for the hiccoughs, and at last he saw the mariner's natal shore and the white cliffs of Albion, and he rushed halfway up the beach, and opened his mouth wide and wide and wide, and said, "Change here for Winchester, Ashuelot, Nashua, King, and stations on the Fitchburg road." And just as he said "Fitch," the mariner walked out of his mouth. But while the whale had been swimming, the mariner, who was indeed a person of infinite resource and sagacity, had taken his jackknife and cut up the raft into a little square grating, all running crisscross, and he had tied it firm with his suspenders. Now you know why you are not to forget the suspenders. And he dragged that grating good and tight into the whale's throat, and there it stuck. Then he recited the following sloka, which, as you have not heard it, I will now proceed to relate. "By means of a grating, I have stopped your ating." For the mariner, he was also an Hibernian, and he stepped out on the shingle and went home to his mother, who had given him leave to trail his toes in the water. And he married and lived happily ever afterward. So did the whale. But from that day on, the grating in his throat, which he could neither cough up nor swallow down, prevented him eating anything except very, very small fish. And that is the reason why whales nowadays never eat men or boys or little girls. The small Stute-fish went and hid himself in the mud under the door-sills of the equator. He was afraid that the whale might be angry with him. The sailor took the jackknife home. He was wearing the blue canvas breeches when he walked out on the shingle. The suspenders were left behind, you see, to tie the grating with, and that is the end of that tale. When the cabin portholes are dark and green, because of seas outside, when the ship goes whop with a wiggle between, and the steward falls into the soup tureen, and the trunks begin to slide, when Nurse C lies on the floor in a heap, and Mummy tells you to let her sleep, and you aren't waked or washed or dressed, why then you will know, if you haven't guessed, you're 50 north and 40 west. Now, wasn't that fun? Like I said, I thought that it was a fitting beginning. A just so beginning. This whale bit off more than he can chew. So, for today's story, we're not actually going to do a whole bunch of analysis because I kind of already did it in the intro. Oops, my bad. But if you enjoyed this, please hit that like button so you can find me again, share with your friends if you think it's something that they would enjoy, or if you're like, I cannot believe that this girl is on a podcast, listen to how awful she is, or I genuinely hope that more people enjoy it than think it's bad. But if you think it's bad, let me know. If you think it's good, let me know. I want to make this better for everybody, and I am always open to questions. And I know that I didn't go too deep into Kipling's background. As I've said before, it breaks my heart, guys. I literally cried. And where this is kind of my way of doing a belated Mother's Day, I don't think there should be tears. Just saying. So maybe the next one we'll go more in depth and discuss some of these things that made me cry. But I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I hope that you take a minute for you and that this helps you to take that moment that you need, because we all need to be able to refill our cups and move forward, recharge our batteries. Life is so very stressful, and I hope that you pass along the kindness today. Don't forget to give the women in your life a late hug. Even if you did it on Mother's Day, they still want that hug, guys. Promise. I'm a mom. I don't get enough hugs. So give the hugs. Have a wonderful rest of your day and pass along that kindness. Talk to you later.